Welcome along to the third installment of the Dylan Eli Masterclass series. My name's Chris. I'm the Industry Liaison Coordinator at the Melbourne SAE campus. Firstly, I'd like to welcome our host once again. Hey Dylan, how you doing?
Doing great. How about you?
Yeah, good, mate. It's been about a month since the last session, so the world's changed a little bit more, and more things have been recorded down at Portia Studios, I believe.
Yeah, well, more importantly, your beard's gotten better.
That's right, yeah, yours too, man.
That's the most important thing right now.
Progress is progress.
Yes.
But just a really quick little bit of housekeeping for everybody playing at home there. We're going to put a little bit more focus on making sure that everyone's questions get answered today. We've been cut a little short for time here and there. So if you would like to ask Dylan a question or just make any particular comments, there's a Q&A section in the bottom of the Zoom here that we'll be fielding all the questions through. So feel free to throw them in there, ask as many as you like. They don't necessarily need to be related to the topics we're covering today. They can relate back to the other two sessions that we've held. But yeah, feel free to shout out. We want to make sure that everyone gets the answers they deserve. But yeah, Dylan, would you like to perhaps tell us a little bit about the surprise Dropbox that we've got in store for students? I'm just going to drop this one into the chat window so that students can click on in and have a bit of a look. This folder includes not only today's goodies, but the other two sessions that we've run so far. But yeah, maybe you could talk us through folders 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, there's a couple things in there, just sort of 3 separate kind of ends of the spectrum, if you will, sessions. They're all Pro Tools sessions. So hopefully you guys can open those and see them. But there's a session in there that we're going to kind of look at today. That's a sort of a building block session for a playback session for the band Fall Out Boy. So it's just one song, but you'll kind of get an idea, and we'll talk about what kind of went into getting that session to the state that it's in currently in the Dropbox, and kind of what leads up to that, and the purpose of why we do what we do with it. The other 2 sessions are, so one is a session that I mixed for an artist named Ari Welcome. It's a pretty intense session. There's like 100+ tracks in there, a lot of stuff going on. So you can kind of see dig in a little bit to a little bit more of a in-depth, pretty hardcore production. And then the other one's a live recording that we did here at the studio with a local artist named KT, and it's just a live rock band pretty much, and it's just some cool songs, and you just to kind of give you a little idea of like how I would treat kind of a more rock, less production, kind of more raw, natural session. So that's kind of what's in there.
Might also be worth noting for everyone at home, just maybe don't fire up your Pro Tools while you're on the Zoom call, just for particular CPU issues. But yeah, feel free to have a bit of a dig through the audio folders, etc. And yeah, we'll remind me to drop that link in there again. So at the end of this one, so that people that are joining later on have access to that one as well.
Cool.
Now, just before we jump in even further, we've got one of our audio lecturers, Nick Harrison from Melbourne here. So he's going to throw in a few little questions as well. And we'll just try and make it a nice little conversation. But Dylan, what do you think? Should we start off with some of the playback and redundancy stuff that you do out on the road? Would that be the best idea?
Yeah. So the first couple sessions. I'm not sure if anyone that's in here now was in any of the first two sessions, but you know, sort of the order of operations, I guess, and you know, from the creative process to when the band is out performing for people, that's kind of the end product now that you know, people are using these tracks for. You know, like people wonder how do they get the record to sound, or the live show to sound like the album, and the answer is they use a lot of the stuff from the album. So stems are combined, you know, processed elements from your mix. So it's, you know, just say all the guitars that have EQ and compression on them, and they've now been combined to a stereo track, or a group of stereo tracks that has all that processing on it. So, you know, in the end, we get to use that in addition to the band on stage playing their instruments to kind of supplement the sound that's coming from the stage, so that, you know, when you go to the show, the songs that they're playing sound like the record, you know, and not have to have 16 musicians on stage, you know, because a lot of times there's layers and layers of guitars and different guitar parts and keyboard parts, and maybe even you know, effects on the vocal that are maybe, or you know, the guitars or something, a delay effect that's very signature to that song, that's maybe not necessarily that easy to recreate perfectly every night. So that's kind of how the whole like playback thing started. Is I think some bands just had a hard time reproducing their record live, and they wanted to really do that. You know, the first artist I worked for doing that was Linkin Park, and I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that music, but it's very, you know, kind of loop heavy, and they have a lot of weird sound effects and swells and, you know, 808 hits and stuff like that. So, you know, to kind of recreate that stuff live, you'd have to have a lot of musicians. They already had 6 guys on stage, but they even had a lot more going on than that. So the backing tracks were a pretty integral part to their show and their sound, for sure. So, you know, I hope that kind of makes sense, but we'll show you this session that I have up here, and you can get an idea of what tracks there are to make this song. And then you can also see the sounds and the tracks that we've omitted that the actual musicians are going to play on stage. Like there's guitar parts, bass parts, drum parts, those kind of things that the band is actually going to play on stage. So let me share this here. So let's see. So we've got this Pro Tools session up here, and so I'll just kind of go through with a little bit with what's going on here. So all these tracks that are inactive here, oops, let's ungroup. These tracks that are inactive here, these are actually live drum parts that the drummer would play live. All of this kind of group of tracks here is additional drums that he's not able to play live, and or, you know, some sounds that are really specific to the song itself that kind of need to be in there for just the sake of getting the right sounds in there. So, and then these are all kind of going through a drum bus. So this is a stem that's been stereo mixed. Let's see what this is here. So that's just like a weird kind of drum sample thing. I think these are claps here, or kind of like a big snare. So that's kind of a signature sound, I think, in the chorus there. These are like these kind of clap, you know, very affected clap things. 808 snares, classic. So, you know, all of those now are coming out as single stereo output. These buses that I have here would technically in a live environment be coming out separate outputs. So you would show up on the front of house mixer or the monitor mixer's console individually, so he could adjust some levels and maybe do some EQ if the room needed it, or if the musician wanted more or less of a certain element. So the next set of things we have here is this this music bus here, which this I think is some sound effects. Yeah, some weird kind of growing and building elements. I think these are some synths, keyboards, piano, and then here's some. So you kind of get the idea. So now that things are sort of similarly grouped, and then these are actually vocals, but they're like harmony vocals, because this is the band Fall Out Boy. So they only there's 4 guys in the band, and you know, not all of them can sing or are able to sing. So there's some harmony stuff in here. Some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me. Remember me for centuries. Just one mistake. So that's some harmony stuff that's going along, playing while they're playing along to, you know, kind of fill in those harmonies that would be missing since they can't actually sing them. And then this is like a click track and a slate track. A lot of artists do this. This is a slate track that kind of tells the artist what song is next and then gives them a count off.
Centuries. 5, 6, 7, 8.
So that would count them off into the downbeat. And a lot of artists do this, so, you know, and give themselves cues. This one's pretty simple, but sometimes, you know, if there's some different arrangements from the record, we'll add a, you know, dance break kind of cue in their ear that only the band is hearing in their ears. Obviously not anyone else in the house will hear it. You know, and then we've got a click track here that's just, you know, more than likely probably just the drummer's hearing, so he's keeping time and everyone's playing along to him. So that's kind of like a real basic playback session, but I'll play everything and you'll hear there's like no guitars, there's no bass, minimal drums, because that's what the guys are actually playing.
Centuries.
So Dylan, before you do that,
yeah,
can I just ask, with that cue, as menial as it is, just that intro that you know, saying what song's coming up in 1, 2, 3, 4. That's, I'd imagine, to go in line with you know, your more sophisticated kind of visuals that we're seeing at shows and stuff now, like any kind of lights or LED screens going on in the back, like if they're super synced to the rhythm.
Yeah, well, so see, this track that I was gonna get there, you jumped the gun. No,
Hey.
So this track down here is actually time code. So
Right.
It's inactive. We don't want to hear that track because it's really obnoxious sounding. But what happens with this track is that it's a SMPTE time code, which is, we could go really deep into that, but we won't. But in, I guess the simple way is this track is like basically breaking down time on a, you know, second by second, frame by frame basis. So as this song plays, this piece of audio that's actually time code is playing, and this is what's controlling the lighting. This is what's controlling the pyro, if there's pyro cues. This is what's controlling the video cues, so everything plays in sync exactly the same every night. So the lighting guys program their whole show to the time that's associated with this time code. So, you know, that's definitely, you know, it's not something that that you hear, but it's a control element that a lot of people, that everyone else kind of in the venue and from the different departments locks to. So the other part of the playback is not only are we playing back sounds that kind of help the band sound more like the record and whatnot, but you're kind of like the hub of control for all the elements of the show, the visuals and, you know, all things kind of attached to that. You know, even like automation of moving parts of the stage and things like that. So it's pretty important, and I'll show you some pictures too of like kind of a couple different playback rigs, but there's a redundancy factor here that comes into play, that, you know, we have two separate machines playing the same thing in sync, so that if one, as we all know, computers and hard drives are not our friends all the time, they decide not to play or crash or whatever, we can you know, we can basically make it so no one would know that one of those computers crashed, because we have a flawless switch over between the two machines and they're running in sync. So, you know, they're playing exactly the same thing at the exact same time. You're only just hearing one at a time until, you know, I can either manually switch to a secondary, you know, redundant machine, or we have switchers that automatically do that sense when the machine stops or crashes or goes down. So that's pretty important, not only for this sonic sound element, but also for all the other elements that are kind of driving the look of the show. So yeah,
it seems to be kind of said to be like the actual cues for everything in the performance. Like that's pretty much your clock for everything.
Yeah, I saw that question, like, or yeah. So it's, yeah, in essence, it is. It's like you're sort of cues that are programmed from all the different lighting people. Like if there's a big explosion or pyro and stuff, their cues are all timed to the SMPTE time code. So their consoles or their, you know, servers or whatever remember those times that they've programmed in. And so, you know, if my time code stops, their trigger cues don't go off, and, you know, they miss their cues, and then it becomes a big mess. So yeah, that's kind of, you know, the long and short of that. I'll kind of show you. I don't have the greatest pictures, but I can show you kind of a couple elements to what a playback rig. So there's sort of like two schools of playback. There's like analog and digital, and they both play a certain part in a certain respect. Some are better than others in certain scenarios. So this is an analog setup here, and if you see here, this unit up top, there's two of these SW8 radials. What this is this is an auto switching unit. So these are actually analog units. They have 16 inputs on the back. This is actually an 16 input, 8 output unit. So what the 16 ins are is it gets 8 ins from the A machine, 8 ins from your B machine, which is your redundant kind of backup machine. And so it's either playing or allowing the audio from the A side or the B side through at any given time. You can manually switch that here if you see this little green button, or there's a tone track which you can use SMPTE for to run to this tone track. And when it's getting tone, it's like a gate in a way, where the track is open, which means it stays on the A side. As soon as that tone goes away, meaning the machine stops or crashes, it instantly will switch to the B machine, so that you would have no dropout at all. And the B machine would just be running in sync, playing right along. So this is, you know, and you can see there's two, these are the redundant interfaces down here, 16 output interfaces. So this is like an analog setup, which is a little bit bigger, but really cool. And you can interface pretty much anybody with an analog rig, which is what's kind of cool about it. So, and then I'll show you a digital playback rig here, which is this guy. He's quite a bit smaller, so he has a lot more capabilities here. So there's the two interfaces here, and what these are actually MADI interfaces. So MADI is a protocol, a digital protocol that can carry up to 64 channels of audio out one coax cable, which is pretty cool because you can obviously get a lot more tracks and a lot more outputs for individual control if you need it from this system. So this would be like the A interface, B interface. The switcher is this little guy up here, which again, he's a MADI switcher. So it's the same concept as the other switch. There's a digital kind of tone that's going to this from one machine, and as soon as one drops out, it'll switch over sample accurate with, you know, no dropouts. This machine, this setup actually can also spit out analog as well as MADI. This is an MADI to analog interface here. So kind of two ways of doing it. They're both equally as effective, just depending on how many tracks you kind of need and how you want to interface the rest of the, you know, your team, your front of house guy and your monitor guy. So I don't know, is there, help me out, Chris, help me go where.
To put this in context for maybe some of the engineers that are starting out there as to why this stuff's important is probably worth talking about. So for instance, even if you're not a live engineer, like, you need to be thinking about this stuff as a studio engineer. For instance, if you've got, like, let's say like a heavy band, like your Linkin Park, or a lot of, you know, hardcore bands and stuff will record in different ways. So you can make something that's amazing for them in the studio. But then they're going to want to go and play gigs with this stuff. So you're going to have the ability to communicate with whoever their live engineer is and say, here's the Pro Tools session. Here's what I've done as far as like the effects and stuff goes. And this is potentially how you can run this to make your show bigger and better. And then hopefully that live engineer is going to go, wow, this is awesome. And that's where all of these kind of systems come into play. Right. So it's meaning from a normal rock band scenario into that next level of kind of a professional environment. And it's kind of really important communication skills to have in your arsenal.
Yeah, the playback thing is become, you know, pretty popular in the last few years because it's, you know, now with the digital, you know, technology, the rigs have gotten smaller, they've gotten more affordable, more powerful, all those kind of things where, you know, before playback was kind of a luxury, if you will, you know, only the bigger bands used them. The smaller bands, you know, couldn't really afford the systems or a guy or a person to kind of like run it and maintain it and, you know, make edits and all that kind of stuff. But now it's gotten a lot more, you know, attainable for kind of middle to smaller size acts. So that's kind of like, you know, I know a lot of the questions that we had before were, you know, how do I make money in the studio and, you know, being an intern and also having another job and all these kind of things. And, you know, it's the kind of have to think a little outside of the box nowadays. You know, it's like where my career, I've kind of done a little of everything. You know, I've done, you know, a lot of studio stuff, but I've now kind of switched gears into doing more of this live stuff, more specifically playback. You know, and for being a studio guy, it really made sense because, you know, I'm able to go out on the road, make edits for bands quickly. Like, you know, a lot of times guys will come 5 minutes before the show and have this idea of, hey, I want to, you know, chop this first chorus in half and add, you know, an extra long vamp on this song or something like that. Whereas, you know, so you need to be able to kind of put that together quickly for the artist so that, you know, they're feeling that vibe, and, you know, they don't want to sit around and wait for, you know, an hour for that edit to happen. So, you know, that skill set is really important for not only the studio, but for this environment, the live environment, and being really quick, being really thorough, being very, you know, again, very much, we talked about this in the other ones, you know, easy to work with and accommodating to the artist, and making them feel confident, number one, that the edit's going to be right and that it's going to be done quickly, and that, you know, they're going to feel confident to come to you and make changes, and you are that guy that's, you know, becomes their go-to guy, you know. So that's or gal. So that's kind of I think you know, another element of something that we talked about in these other sessions too, and being able to kind of like know when to be that a guy that's assertive. You know, sometimes you can say, hey, look, I don't know if this edit's going to work right, if you need this right away. Like, maybe there's some other technical stuff that's going into that. Like, same thing with time code. If we change time code length, now the lighting guys, their stuff's not going to be in sync. The video guys' stuff's not going to be in sync. So you kind of have to really be aware of everyone's departments, maybe not on a technical standpoint, but you really need to understand how they're interfacing with you and what the capabilities of their equipment is as well. So that's, you know, that's another kind of whole other element to it, and being aware and understand how they interface with you. And, you know, if you just make an edit and don't let them know, then they're kind of screwed, you know. So it's a big communication is important in living in that world, for sure.
So we've got a Ollie that's asked, like, what about using a Dante system there? So, like, what would be, like, I guess you'd know your Dante systems as well. Can you sort of talk about, like, what's the difference between, say, you know, your Matties to your Dantes to everything else, just for those that are maybe a little bit more new to all of these kind of concepts?
Yeah. So Dante's been around for a while. Dante is just another digital protocol that is audio over Ethernet. So that's something that's really cool about it, is everyone has Ethernet cables now in their house for, you know, plugging in their computer, plugging in their cable box. You know, it's Wi-Fi or Ethernet is such a common, you know, protocol now. And Dante is very similar to Matty in the sense that you get 64 channels over a single Ethernet cable. And Dante is really cool. It's been used, they've been using it in the broadcast world for a really long time. For like the music world, it hasn't really caught on as of, you know, until recently. Just not as many kind of companies that make audio consoles specifically have adopted that technology. But there's more and more companies doing that. And Dante is really cool because you can do a lot and control and see all the things that are on the network, which is nice because you can kind of detect errors before they actually happen. It'll tell you when there's some problems and stuff like that. So Dante's pretty cool. I've put together a couple Dante playback rigs for artists in the last year or so, and yeah, it's pretty cool. Dante is a very cool way to go, for sure.
So that's kind of, I guess, what's superseded maybe some of the systems you were showing before, or like it's more a commonality, or?
I would say it's still, in my experience anyway, it's not super common yet. The Dante world is still pretty new for the playback specifically, and even just, you know, music touring world. Matty seems to be the one that a lot of consoles still use, and there's a lot more equipment out there that uses that protocol. The Dante stuff is there's a couple different versions of not Dante, but audio over Ethernet. There's another, AVB is another one that still uses an Ethernet cable, but it's a different protocol. So like Dante and AVB, they use the same cable, but they can't talk to each other. So there's different ways of doing the same thing with the same cabling. But Dante's kind of the most popular of those protocols that use Ethernet. I could see in the next couple years that probably everything will be Dante or some sort of audio over Ethernet protocol.
Sure. Hey, all right, we should probably get moving along. But Dylan, do you maybe want to talk about, like, we're going to talk about, committing tracks and, dry and fixing the mix and stuff there. Like, do you want to sort of start launching into that section of the session?
Yeah. So I'm looking at some of these questions here too.
Feel free to jump into those as well.
Yeah, I think we sort of answered those. The other question was, can they get the audio for the other two sessions? It's in that same link, so that they're all in there. Yeah. So the next thing that we were talking about, and you kind of alluded to it, was the committing stuff, in the mix and or sticking with like a dry thing and an affected thing. Again, in one of the last, I don't know if it's the last one or the first one, but I'm a fan of, committing things, because if you leave it open-ended, number one, I feel like you just spend a lot of time not being creative and focused on the greater whole of the song or the sound that you're going for. You're kind of like, oh, I'll get to it later, and that your vibe might be totally different later, which, all right, I guess that could be a good thing, but I don't know. I think you're going to leave more work for yourself later, and worst case, you don't like the sound that you got, re-record it. Hey,
Dylan, before you go on, sorry to interrupt there, just as far as like what we actually mean by committing stuff, just in case there's a couple of students there that may be starting out going, what does you mean committing? Like, what is this thing? So can you just quickly talk about what that is? It's not like,
So okay, the perfect example is in the session that I pulled up here with the stem tracks for the Fallout Voice session. So though each one of those tracks has been committed with all of the effects and the EQ and the compression or whatever else that you've put on that thing, to make it sound the way it sounds. So if you have a dry drum, you put reverb on it and you compress it and EQ it. There's all these different layers of things that you're doing to it to get to the final sound, if you will. So you've got the dry sound, the original sound, and then you've got the like finalized, affected, committed sound that you've committed your effects and your EQ and your compression to. So when I'm talking about committing something, you're talking about the way you want it to sound and all the things you do to it to make it sound the way you sound, but putting it all in one track or in one stereo track. So you can't really go back and change it. If you wanted to change it, you'd have to go back to your original session and deconstruct it and change those elements. But once you've committed to a sound, you've now in your head decided, this is the sound I want, this is the sound I like at this point in time, and it works well with all the other sounds and all the other elements in my song or my mix. So why wouldn't you commit it? That if you were going to come back later, then just make it right now and then commit it. I feel like, through the course of history of making records, like the Beatles, again, for example, I'm sure this example has been used a million times. They only had 4 tracks. Granted, they did some magic with using multiple tape machines to kind of bounce stuff back and forth, but when it's all said and done, some of these Beatles tracks had so many layers of elements, but they didn't have 100 tracks of tape that they could use to mix and play with later on in the mix. They had to commit to the sound. And then it was really committed when they had to bounce it with other elements that weren't just that same sound. So, your committing is kind of like, it is scary when you first start out in your engineering career, if you will, because you maybe are second guessing, like, oh man, I don't know if I like love this sound or not. But that's kind of how you learn, and that's how you're gonna get better. And hopefully if for whatever the case, if something just is horrible, which you in theory should have got and caught beforehand, committing is more of like a creative choice. It's not a like fix something that's broken choice. If something's broken and not right, don't get it right, but don't commit it until you do get it right. I get it. Sometimes there's some artists that have commitment issues, and I think that's sort of an engineer's job. I mean, and a producer's job. They kind of have this sound or this vision in their head, and to get there, you have to make some choices and you have to make some commitments sonically to get there. Because if you don't make any choices, when is the record ever going to be done? It won't be. It'll never be done, because you'll never make a choice and never commit to anything. So I figure a bunch of little commitments along the way add up to one big whole commitment, rather than no commitments along the way, having then to make a ton of commitments at the end, which is overwhelming. And you kind of feel like you lose some of the creative and juices, if you will, from that record making process, in my opinion.
Dylan, a question for you here, just going back to what you're saying now to what you were saying before. So with, say you're committing your reverb for, say, like your Fall Out Boy live track, are you then going to send out that committed track, say if it's got your verb on it, to front of house, and then the front of house guy is going to then affect it again? Or is that going to be like, is that what you're talking about when you're talking dry and wet here, or? Does that
yes, no. I mean, so that's kind of like there's when you're talking like that world, there's more than just one person making the choice. There's sort of a couple different things that you kind of have to take into account. Typically, I would say that with tracks, you want to keep them wet, committed, whatever you want to call them, like not a dry track, because sometimes, again, that stuff is very signature to the record itself. So rather than having the front of house guy try to have to recreate something that has a signature sound to it and do it every night the same way, just use what's already there, what's on the record that everybody knows and is used to hearing. I would say you could supplement that, in a live environment, but you're also in a lot of times in a weird sounding room. So you're there. That's why you have some control over the elements, not so much the dry and the wet, but more just like levels, and you can maybe EQ them as a whole. Those are more elements, I think, that tend to be more important for it to translate, rather than like more reverb or less reverb, especially if it's something that is very specific to that sound, or the signature sound of that element. So yeah, I think in that regards, the front of house guy, every guy has their own way of mixing, but in a way, I think having tracks is kind of a cool, because a good starting point for someone to mix, because having stems, in theory, you put everything at 0, at unity gain, and then that's the record in essence. And then once you start subtracting these other elements that the band's playing, you kind of want to bring those other elements to unity to match those tracks, you know? And then you can kind of have fun with creative mixing in the live thing, where like for a solo, you're bringing that solo out, or there's some cool vocal parts that are happening that are that's like that kind of live, raw kind of feel that's happening, you know, but in conjunction with a kind of real solid backing, you know, tracks that are kind of like holding it down. So it's a good way for the artist to kind of be able to like play a little bit and not feel like if they drop out for a minute that everything's going to go away. I think they kind of tend to lean on that a little bit and can have more fun with performing rather than having to make sure they play every note perfectly or the same every night kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. We should jump in and have a bit of a look at some of these session setups for the live playback and stuff, and just see what it is that you're doing under the hood there.
Let's see. So again, this session is not super, let's screen share this again here. You know, it's not super intense, but here we can, you know, open up these tracks here and see, you can see, you know, so that's just like what the regular drums would be. These are more kind of bass and guitar here. So that stuff is the stuff that the guys would be playing. Obviously, they don't have the like record stop sound in there, but you know, they kind of decided and committed, well, you know, we can do without that element in the live performance. But if you kind of listen here, you'll see what would be playing minus the guys, if you will, and this is what they would be hearing in essence before the stuff they're playing.
5, 6, 7, 8.
So, you know, obviously there'd be guitars and bass here that the guys are playing on stage. You know, and he's singing the verse here. And then along with that, this Simpy track is controlling different cues that are happening with the lights and with the pyro and video content and everything. You know, the other thing I was going to say about this session too, and this is another kind of thing that happens a lot in the live setting, is this song originally was at 88 BPMs. This session's at 92 BPMs. So there's, and it's also it's either a half step or a whole step lower in pitch than the original record is. You know, and the reason for that is the faster tempo just felt like it needed a little bit more energy live. So, you know, the guys decided to speed it up. The lower pitch was because, you know, you're singing over, you know, an hour and a half set, and, you know, maybe if it's at the top or upper end of his range, you know, he's not trying to blow out his vocals and like wear his voice out, you know, halfway through the set. So that's another element that actually happens a lot in the live world, is that, you know, artists will do some manipulating there to not only help themselves out so they can make it through the night, you know, and give the best performance, but also, you know, add an element of some more energy with the speed, you know, like with upping the tempo of things, you know, and maybe play around with arrangements and stuff like that. So if you kind of are in that world, that's something to kind of take into consideration and know how to do with Pro Tools or Ableton, or, you know, whichever kind of playback DAW you're using, is how to speed things up quickly in a way that sounds good, and or change the pitch globally of a song to kind of match what the artist is trying to do. So we don't have an Ableton session up here, but Ableton's another, you know, pretty powerful tool that a lot of live playback engineers use. It offers a little bit more improv capabilities, if you will. You can, you know, do some looping on the fly. You can jump between sections pretty seamlessly, where it'll change like on the beat and stuff like that. So there's some artists that use Ableton as a creative tool, kind of almost like a, you know, another band member that's able to, you know, change and groove with the band, if you will. I mean, even though it's kind of driving the band, but the it kind of depends on the artist. You know, some artists just like, they stick to the songs and the arrangements and maybe make the edits beforehand. Some artists like to kind of have a little improv and like be able to, you know, change it on the fly, like when the set's going. So, you know, Ableton's good for that. Digital Performer is another one that a lot of artists use that's got some improv looping capabilities as well. So those are a couple other cool programs to kind of look into and get hip to for playback, you know, specifically. There's just I mean, each one of those, you know, the big three, I call them, you know, like Pro Tools, Ableton, Digital Performer, and the playback world, you know, each kind of has its own advantages and disadvantages. And you just kind of, it just seems it'll certain artists, I can't talk right now. Certain DAWs are better for certain artists because of what they're trying to do and how they're, you know, how they're used to working as well. So yeah, that's kind of the end game for what you're doing in the studio is going to end up as stems for playback for an artist for tour. When tours start up again, I guess one day, which this is, you know, like a really strange time to be having this conversation, because there is no, I don't know if things have opened up out there or not, but I know in the States it's like done. No live performances at all right now.
I think you're saying like a lot of them are following like the NBA and looking at those kinds of things, because when those kind of sporting arenas open up, it's kind of the same rules applies to live music and crowds gathering. So
right. Yeah. But I think, you know, when it does open up, there's going to be a lot of demand, because all these artists that have been sitting at home for 6 months, and when it comes, you know, when it's opens up again, you know, over a year, all these artists that maybe were about to go on tour are going to go out. And then all these artists that weren't really planning on going on tour have been at home writing records and are going to go on tour. So I think it's like going to be the floodgates when all this stuff kind of opens again. So get your chops together now. And, you know, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people looking for people to do some playback stuff. And, you know, hopefully right now in the studio, a lot of people are working, which, you know, I've been, very lucky and very grateful to have been, been pretty busy during this whole quarantine with artists being creative and wanting to record stuff. So yeah.
Speaking of, you were going to show us some of the session from the artists that you've been working with recently. And I think, did you say, am I correct, you popped some of that session in the Dropbox?
No, I didn't.
No.
There's a live session that we recorded here that's in the Dropbox, which is it's a local artist here in LA, but just kind of a cool, pretty straight ahead rock band. The artist that I've been working with, Luna, she's been, just put out an album and is working on and been doing some pre-recorded kind of like TV shows and stuff like that here. But no, unfortunately that stuff isn't in the Dropbox because I don't think all those songs are released and out yet. It's still a freshie.
Just a little mindful of the time here, but we're going to talk about some basic mixing techniques, I think maybe with that file that you've included in the Droppy, but if you want to jump into maybe some of that stuff and show us what you've got.
Yeah, let's do that. Let me pull up that session. This is the reason kind of why I put this session in here is sort of a alternative to the really intense kind of crazy session that I had going with the artist Ari, to kind of just show a little bit of how I address a session like this that's kind of a more raw, like, just rock band, no bells and whistles, no overdubs, no nothing. So let's see, I can share this session here. Let's share this here. So this session is, you can see here we've got 20 tracks, and some of these are just like my effects channels, like buses and stuff like that. So I mean, we've really got, kicks, snare, two mics on the snare, rack tom, 2 rack toms, a floor tom, overhead, a bass guitar, and 2 regular guitars and a vocal. So it's pretty, pretty straight up. Let's play a little so you can kind of get an idea of what it's like here.
This is probably pretty similar kind of looking session to what a lot of students would be like producing at SAE.
Gotcha. Yeah. Let's do this. I actually kind of have it split out on the board here. So, yeah, I mean, you see it, we've kind of just got a real straight ahead, this, kind of a 90s feel, but we'll go into, you guys have this session. We don't have to listen to all the songs, but I'll kind of go through some of the elements and sort of what I've done here. So I'm mix this one on my actual analog desk here, which is nice, because I've got my EQs and stuff like that I can use on the board and my outboard gear. But I'm still kind of doing a little bit of processing here in the box pre the desk. So this is a This is an L1 limiter, which I'm sure most people have used and seen. It's a Waves. It's like one of their original plugins, but this is like one of my favorites for kick drum. For whatever the reason, it's just kind of like makes the kick drum really present, and what's really cool about it is that it's a brick wall limiter, so if the the kick has a lot of energy to it because it's a lot of low end, and so it still lets the low end kind of breathe, but it brick walls the dynamic of it a little bit. So a lot of times I like to put drums through like a stereo bus compressor and kind of do a parallel compression. And a lot of times the kick drum is what's like making that compressor pump. So I'll put that limiter on it to kind of let all the drums kind of like get that compressor to pump sort of evenly, and not so much just the kick, because then when it lets off, all the other stuff kind of has this like pumping feel to it. So that's kind of a guy that I like to use a lot on the kick. The snare bottom, so this I didn't really do anything much to. I just used this to flip the phase on the bottom snare, and then just did EQ on the board. Let's see, rack. So the toms, I'm definitely like, I do a lot of gating. I like to gate but let some of the like bleed come through. I'm not a big fan of like chopping out all of the non-tom playing stuff, because I like to kind of let this stuff come through a little bit. If we can hear it here. It's a little bit low for it to come through since I have everything's turned down. But in essence, it's in the gate, I don't have it gating 100%. I'm ducking by like, 15 dB, which is still a lot, but it still feels, a little more natural. If you hear that, there's no toms playing there, but that's just kind of like the other drum bleed, but I'm just controlling the bleed. So I like to do that. I gate my toms. I don't chop out all the other stuff outside of the tom hits typically. So that's kind of my, especially in a recording like this, like a live kind of thing, I'll try and keep some of that stuff in there. Otherwise it just sounds weird because you're in this like live room with a live band playing, and then it's like, it's kind of really tight and it sounds almost too good in a way. So I don't like to get rid of too much stuff. I think I've got some like a reverb send here. Go into this tom verb, which is just again, this kind of standard reverb here. Just I found a chamber that I liked that kind of felt similar to the room that I was actually in recording the band in. I'm a big fan of that. Like I kind of approach something like a band live recording like if I was at the show, if I'm standing in the back of the room listening to the band, obviously I want to be able to hear everything, but I don't want it to sound like a record. That just, if that's the case, I'd just listen to the record. But I like to make it feel a little bit more live, a little bit more, not raw, but just like you're in the room with the band. So I'll kind of put reverbs on things that sound real similar to the room itself. Like these tracks here this is a stereo room track. That's just like everything in the room, just a stereo room track of the band playing. So it's kind of hard to hear in here, I think, but you kind of get the idea of that it's just that room. And so I try to match my reverbs to that. Let's see here, the bass. So the bass, we did a DI track. So I put an amp simulator on it to make it sound more like a real amp, SVT. This put a little bit of dirt on the bass there with this tube screamer guy, and then this probably a compressor. Yep. And then the trusty old, Bomb Factory 1176. Again, I'm a big fan of the Bomb Factory 1176 and the Bomb Factory 660. Those are like two of my go-to compressors, and they're the ones that like come free with Pro Tools. I just like the way they sound more than some of the other companies like Waves or whoever makes them. This is guitars. So this one, if you see, I'm just kind of like taking a little bit of low mids out, adding a little bit of like some of the body back in, giving it a little bit of boost in like 2K. Not much kind of going on there. Again, like sort of goes along with the committing it. I try to choose the mics and where I put the mics specifically when I'm tracking on a live band in a live situation is important, because I use the polar patterns of the mics to my advantage to get rejection, even though I'm like they're all in the same room. Let's see if we can hear this guitar and see kind of how much bleed there is. Yeah, so that guitar is like in the room with the band, blazing, but I've kind of, the way I position the amp and the way I put the mic is sort of rejecting the drums and a lot of the other stuff. So that's like, those are some tricks to, getting cleaner recordings, even if you don't have isolation, is using your polar patterns and positioning of your microphones to your advantage. Like on the snare, you probably can't really tell, but like you can hear the rest of the band in there, but it's pretty tucked back there. Again, I've used the polar pattern to kind of like reject the hi-hat and some other cymbals and stuff like that. Let's see if there's any other tricky stuff that I'm doing in here. Again, this is my go-to on vocals, the Bomb Factory Fairchild 660. It sounds awesome. I put it on vocals, even if I'm not even compressing, it just sounds good. Some SSL, which the SSL is great because it's got everything you need in one place. You've got compression, gating, EQ. It's just a good utility plug-in for this kind of thing specifically. But I use it in like studio mixes a lot as well. It's got this little harmonic guy here, which is cool because this sort of is supposed to emulate having an analog console and like driving it a little bit harder. So I like to turn this up all the way automatically out of the gate because it sounds better.
Hey Dylan, that probably flies into, just to take you over to Pank's question over here. Just talking about modern pop vocals, which might have something to do with like just harmonic exciters and things like that. I'm just talking about like your Billie Eilish's and stuff and their particular sort of polished kind of, I guess, the sizzle on those sort of vocals. Is there any sort of thing in particular, just from your experience, that just really helps those kind of things pop out?
Where's the question? Oh, I see it. Modern pop vocals, certain sounds that polish them. It sounds very different than other genres. What could it be? So, that's a trick question. I think that's a lot of people, every engineer sort of has their own way of getting that sound. I think that sound comes from a combination of things. It comes from, I think auto-tune is definitely one of those things that's pretty much always on vocals. Like a lot of people think of auto-tune as being very extreme. It can be, obviously, but it's also a sound. A lot of artists and a lot of stuff that I'm working on, I put auto-tune on it, even if it doesn't need it, or because it does add a little bit of a sound. It's kind of almost it's like more of a feeling and kind of this edge and kind of polished thing, I think is what I think polished is probably a good word for it. It just kind of polishes the vocal a little bit. I know a lot of guys use some sort of like harmonic kind of plug-in, like the Decapitator is a really popular one. A lot of plugins now sort of have some harmonic kind of, element to it. I use my hardware. I have this box that I designed that's a transformer box that kind of gives some like harmonic saturation elements that can be subtle or they can be pretty harsh. It can do some sort of fun transformer type compression if you drive it hard, and that's a whole other kind of world too. But that's I have a good I like a hybrid way of doing things, and I use a lot of stuff in the box, but I also use my console and my outboard stuff as well. And I think a lot of people do that. Another thing that a lot of guys use, and I haven't gotten so much into it, but I have a little bit, is the what is it called? The filter, not Filter Freak. Why am I totally drawing a blank? It's an EQ that like everyone uses. That's super powerful. You can get very, very minute with it. It'll come to me. And that's another way to really hone in on kind of like every vocalist has a little bit of a different frequency that's kind of like has that edge to it, but you want to add that edge but not make it harsh, so there's a fine line there. So I think that's kind of like, I think that answers it. I mean, there's so many different ways to do one thing now, it's whatever you like best.
It's probably something for like younger engineers to be aware of. Just like, I remember like when I was starting out, you'd play around with like these different kind of exciters and things, and you'd see them popping out, like you'd hear them popping out and you'd be like, whoa, cool, that's like fizzing. And it's like, it's great when you first hear it, but then after a few years of like mixing, you're like, oh, what was I thinking doing that? So it's kind of like great for training your ears on those little different harmonics, but there's certainly that like point where you can kind of go too far with it, and it's something you really just need to learn to balance and use to your advantage rather than your detriment.
Yeah, Angus found it. Fab Filter. I don't know why I was having a brain fart, but yeah, Fab Filter is like that's the go-to EQ plugin, especially for that pop stuff. It's very much has that sound to it for sure. Let's see. So let's maybe answer some of these questions here. Let me kind of go see what else is in here. Trivial question, but have you ever recorded drums, and what are your thoughts versus that or an acoustic kit? Yeah, I have recorded electronic drums. What's cool about electronic drums is that you kind of get that feel of like a real drummer, obviously, but you can change the sounds that in a way that's kind of like goes back on what I was saying and like committing to something. But if you wanted to, you can have the feel of a real drummer, but you record the MIDI, and then you can like add different drum samples in there as the song goes along. And that's kind of a cool feature and something that's fun to do. I know a lot of, live, a lot of drummers use acoustic drums, but with triggers on them that are triggering electronic sounds like from the record. So you've kind of got that blend of the real acoustic kit along with the actual like snare sample from the record, but it's like in time because you're triggering at the same time you're hitting the acoustic drum. So like the drum thing is kind of a cool tool, in that world, for live performance, and even in the studio for being able to get and change sounds really, really quickly and easily, but kind of maintaining the feel. let's see. So could you splice the toms and then use that bleed as a separate track with special EQ? Maybe give that bleed a snare presence or hi-hat presence. I'm not totally sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you could, but the problem with that is it would have to still be in time, because you're getting like rhythmic drum elements bleeding into the toms. So if you took drum bleed and then, you know, EQ'd it separately to give a snare presence or hat presence, like, yeah, I think you could do that. You know, that would only, I feel like that would be, you know, something that you would maybe be doing as either as like a special effect or as a fix, possibly. Like if maybe your hi-hat mic wasn't working or broke or something and you couldn't go back and like fix it, and you had to try and pull something out of that, maybe. I don't know. That there's no rules, man. Like you can do whatever you want. If it's cool and it sounds good, do it. You know, I think the one thing I was, you know, one thing I kind of was talked about on one of these other classes too, is that it took me years and years to learn this, but like less is more. Like a lot of times I would get tracks from people, you know, producers or even stuff that I recorded. And, you know, again, I'm kind of in control of my recording, so I can get sounds that I want. But, you know, if I get stuff from a producer or from another engineer or something and it sounds good, don't do anything to it. If it sounds good and it works in the track, you don't have to EQ it. You don't have to compress it. You don't have to put reverb on it. Like it can just be. That's okay. And it took me forever to get that concept and figure that out. And that just like, my mixes got so much better the less stuff I used to get things to sound different, I guess. I don't know. You know, that was one thing that really helped my mixes out in general, was just if it sounded good, leave it. Don't do anything to it. So let's see. What's some other ones? Could you please explain on the VST on the vocal? What is the first VST? So I think that we were just, I'll do another screen share real quick there, but the first thing that I used on the vocal is a compressor, and it's specifically this Fairchild 660 compressor. This is like 95% of the time I put this on every vocal that I ever do, and it's always the first thing in the chain, because what's cool about this is it's a subtle, it sounds good, it makes things warmer, fatter, thicker, but it's like compression is very transparent. It doesn't, can't really tell it's compressing. It just kind of evens out the vocal a little bit. So I put this first to even things out before it gets to this next plugin, which is an EQ, but it's also got compression in it too. So I like to kind of do things in stages, not compress really hard in one thing. I sort of compress a little bit in a couple different places, and same thing, maybe EQ in a couple different places, rather than just a lot of hard EQ in one place. So I don't know, hopefully that makes sense and answers that question. Thoughts on parallel compression versus multi-band compression in mid-side mode for hip hop pop vocals? That's like a very multi-layered question. I couldn't say hip hop rap pop vocals like I would or wouldn't do it, depending on not necessarily genre, just kind of like, if, again, sort of back to what I was saying, like, does it need it? Does it get you to where you want the sound of that vocal to be? You know, if parallel compression is what you need to get there, then use that. If multi-band is what you need to get there, then use that, you know. I wouldn't say anything is a very specific, you know, genre. I mean, I've done like hip hop records where I've done stuff that I totally had only done on like rock records previously, like put distortion on things and like done, you know, really, you know, like put really crazy reverbs and stuff on it. I mean, maybe that's not a typical thing, but it like each song and each kind of artist and everything sort of has different things that it calls for. But I would say like parallel compression and like multi-band compression are both cool things for different things. I use multi-band compression less as like compression, but more almost like as EQ. I use it as like, if I'm getting something that's maybe a little bit harsh in the high mids, but I don't want to like EQ it out because I feel like I lose some of the presence. I use that compression as like kind of like EQ to kind of tame those that frequency range, and vice versa, same thing. Like I'll like, even if it's not really compressing, sometimes I like the way some multi-band compressors work in just actually turning up a frequency range, just because I like the way their crossovers are happening and stuff. So yeah, the mid-side mode, that's like a whole other thing. I haven't really ever gone like crazy on a mid-side on one specific vocal. I've done mid-side on like mixes, overall mixes, and maybe like, stereo guitars and stuff like that. But on a mono vocal, maybe not so much, but maybe. Would you agree? That was from Angus. This one, Orem. Would you agree in the box is always better for peak limiting than outboard limiters because of the faster response to transients? I would say, yeah. I mean, the box is probably faster because you get look ahead, response for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know many people that use like outboard limiters, like on that kind of a thing, like a super peak limiter on as an outboard gear. I don't know many people that use that anymore anyway. So I would say, yeah, probably in the box is is better for that, if that's the thing you're going for sure. Do you use saturation for lead vocal? Yeah, sometimes I do. I mean, at some point I'm probably saturating everything. Like I like analog stuff on everything, and like that's the kind of what's different about analog versus digital, is that digital is what it is, until you put something on it. Whereas like analog, putting something through my console is adding some saturation, some harmonics, and like stuff that wasn't there before, and some consoles sound differently than others, and that's kind of what makes consoles and analog mixing sort of cool and different than mixing in the box and purely in a digital realm. So I would say, yeah, I probably always use saturation on vocals, but I probably use saturation on everything whenever I can. So let's see.
It's probably important to note there. It's like it's good for engineers to know where it's saturating and why.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that you don't want saturated because maybe you don't like, maybe it just, again, it doesn't need it or it doesn't sound good with it. So, I'll maybe not split that element out to my desk, or, like make it come back to the desk not as hot, and then just turn a fader up rather than like driving the desk harder with like a more output to get more of the saturation happening here at the console or the outboard gear or whatever. So yeah, I think it just depends on what it is. But yeah, that's a good point. Like, again, we'd never have enough time. We could do, Chris, you guys got to have me back for like 10 more of these, and then we can like start getting into like the really like finite, like minute, cool little things that like, are subtle, but like make a big difference over the course of like a bunch of tracks and stuff, and like that.
Well,
that's
this stuff just makes it. Sorry to butt in. This is kind of the stuff that makes a good engineer, is just understanding that, pre and post and where all that stuff's happening and why. And the greater your understanding of that sort of stuff, the better you are in the studio, That's why it's fun to nerd out about this stuff. That's why we have these sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I there's a lot of engineers. It's funny, I think a lot of engineers that don't know that, but they just use their ear, and you still need to know what tool to use to get the result that you're trying to get. Maybe if you don't know the technical happenings of it, that's not the end of the world. I mean, I'm probably more technical than a lot of other engineers that are out there. I mean, there's even probably some really major mixers that everybody's heard of that aren't really that technical, but they just know their gear and how to get a certain sound. Like they've experimented and said, this sounds really cool. I don't really know why it's doing it, but I like what it's doing, and I know how to make it do that. And they just they're more of like, I feel like that's a person that's much more of like, oh, it sounds purple or blue or green. Like, it's like they kind of think of things differently. They're not so technical about it, but there's no right or wrong way. I think that's just as cool and just as pertinent as knowing really what technically is going on. From my standpoint, I'm a technical guy, so I really like to know what's going on, because I understand how it's interacting. And so I know what it's going to do almost before I do it, in a way, so that's just kind of my kind of outlook and take on it. But yeah, we need a lot more time to get super geeky and nerdy with it. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just going through that. It looks like there's a couple more questions here. Specific book.
Here we go. There's this fun question again.
The book about publication you enjoy reading about relation to mixing and mastering. Well, yeah, it's a slightly different question than before, but I would still say that same book, that Yamaha sound reinforcement book. That book is so cool. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. That book is cool. It's very technical and is really, really cool about that. About teaching you what sound waves are doing and knowing how transducers work and all that kind of stuff is important, because you need to kind of know why you're hearing things the way you're hearing it, and turning stuff up louder, why it sounds different than when it's lower, even though you haven't done anything EQ wise. That's another important part of mixing, which I guess could be, related to this, in the sense that, with mastering guys, I'm not a mastering engineer. I've done a lot of mastering, but these mastering guys have a very, they set their volume and they never change it throughout the session. And they have this optimal set of this level in volume in there that correlates to their room. And they know how their ears hear, if you will. Like, they know that if they turn up past a certain point, their ears start changing the frequencies that are kind of coming out of the speakers. So if you listen at a lower volume or a higher volume, certain frequencies stand out or get duller because your ears are compensating for this volume thing. So that book talks about that. That book talks about those kind of things, and how your ears, why certain frequencies go away at certain higher volumes and why they come back at lower volumes and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's a good book for that kind of information, for sure. Outside of that, I don't really know any other books. I mean, just reading about other engineers and their techniques and what they do and how they do it, and trying it out. That's the way, I learned, is just from being in the studio and asking the engineer, hey, what'd you do there? Why'd you do that? And he says it and that kind of makes sense, but then I go to the studio and try it myself. And then I can really understand what it's doing. Oh, that's why he did that. Now I understand it, because I'm actually doing it and understanding how it's working with the thing that I'm trying to goof around with it on, so that, reading can only get you so far until you can actually put it into practice, I feel like. Let's see, what else do we have? I have an analog 1176, but my A to D converter is a Focusrite. Should I be using 1176 while mixing and risk poor conversion? If it sounds good, yeah, man. do it. I'm like, if you have a couple conversions happening, it's no big deal. If you have a real good 1176, man, use it. I bet it sounds awesome. I wouldn't even think twice if you needed to 1176 it and give it some vibe. Nah, do it. Use the ADD converter. Who cares? Any tips and advice for new producers on mixing and mastering their own tracks? That's like a really open-ended question. I mean, the biggest tip and trick I would say would be just practice, like literally practice, but also don't do any, again, go back to what I just said. Don't do anything to something if it doesn't need it. That's took me 15 years to realize that. Like, if it doesn't need anything, don't do anything to it. That'll save you a lot of time and headache for sure in the long run.
Hey, Dylan, we might do like maybe one or two more questions and then we'll wrap it up, man.
Cool. All right. Well, it looks like we've sort of got through most of the questions here, unless I missed something.
Yeah, I think we've ticked a lot of boxes there. Hey guys, if anyone's got any last questions there, just shout them out. Dylan, just to finish up, man, I really, before I say thanks so much and for everything, can you maybe give everyone at home like a bit of a plug on your studios and your socials and stuff, and just tell them about like where they can find you and maybe look you up and keep in touch down the track?
Yeah, I mean, anybody, I know from the first couple sessions I've had some students or people that were in the classes, hit me up on Instagram and stuff like that. Instagram's probably the best place that I sort of live in that world. And the Instagram that I'm most active with is just Portia Street Studios. I mean, I can write it in here if you guys want, but it's just studios, and that you can message me there and just say, hey, I saw your masterclass and like I had this question, like, I'll try and get back to you. I mean, I like nerding out and stuff for sure, so absolutely hit me up there. I'd love to answer any questions or anything like that there, and then you can kind of follow along and see some of the stuff we're doing here. And we try to have fun here and do cool things when we can, and we're just like, we're kind of part of this neighborhood and the community here, and just it's a really cool kind of creative community here. So I'll be in here like mixing, and then an artist that I worked with last year will like be walking by and like see me in here and come just sit on the couch and hang out, and we'll just catch up. That's kind of like most of my days. It's just kind of working on music, being creative, but also just like hanging out and just kind of being involved with the community, and trying to get other artists to collaborate, and like that's kind of that's what I enjoy about doing music, is that kind of just creative, like, and camaraderie, with like other musicians and people that you have things in common with that are creative. Even if you like someone's doing hip hop and they like, some like guy that does like, goth or something like that comes in and like they're just vibing, that's kind of the cool thing about, my studio, is we sort of do a little of everything, and I've done a little of everything in my career. And so I think it just kind of follows me around. I don't really, there's just different kind of music happening here all the time. Like I just mixed a cumbia record, like, of all things. That was really fun, and and it was just a different change of pace, and so it, like that, I don't even know what we're talking about other than just like, hey, that's what I like to do. I just like to have fun and work on good music. That's really it, and it doesn't matter what genre it is. And, you know, I don't overanalyze it. I just like the music tells me what to do to make it sound good, and hopefully the artist likes it. And most of the time they do. Knock on wood, thank you. Very grateful for that, you know, so.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, look, we'll round it up, but yeah, thank you so much for all your work putting together the last 3 sessions with us. I'm really looking forward to hosting you on campus, hopefully all of our campuses at some point in the future.
That would be awesome. I would love to come back out and hang out with you guys in Australia.
Amazing, man. Yeah, but guys, look, check out Dylan's thrown it in the chat there. There's Portia Street Studios. You can Google it as well. There's going to be, for those of you asking, a link sent out via email to all of the attendees, I believe sometime next week. So you should get an email about that where you're able to watch the last 3 of the sessions, just in case you're wanting to catch up on anything there. Just going to have a quick little look. Last little questions here.
I'm going to answer this one. I like tape op. I really like to read. Tape op is cool. Like this person asked, like, where do you read about other engineers' techniques? Like Tape Op magazine is really cool. Mix magazine is really cool. Obviously, you know, someone said, you know, YouTube, Instagram, Reddit. Reddit's great. I've really gotten into Reddit lately. Like there's some really cool stuff on Reddit, some cool subreddits on all that kind of stuff. But, you know, you know, it usually just finds me, like stuff will pop up and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. And like maybe an engineer I've never even heard of before, I'll like see them somewhere like, yeah, on YouTube or maybe in Tape Op or something and read about him and be like, oh man, this guy's like doing such cool stuff. You know, and like, again, I've been fortunate enough earlier in my career to work with a lot of like really good engineers and producers. So I've been able to just sit next to them and like ask them the questions and, you know, sit and kind of watch them do stuff. So that's, again, something that I would recommend to anybody, is that I know it's a bummer and it sucks, but try and go intern somewhere, you know, worst case. And like, that's honestly where I learned the most, period. Like I learned more interning, not being paid, than I did going to school. Like, not to take anything away from you guys, but like that was what got my foot in the door to know enough. But when I went to a spot and I interned and like assisted and just kind of was like a fly on the wall, that's really where I like learned the most. And you know, if you can do it at like a smaller facility, I would kind of recommend, so you get a little bit more one-on-one time with the engineers, because some of these bigger facilities like kind of can get lost in the mix as like a runner, and then you just like don't really get to sit in the sessions so much, and you know, for a while anyway. So I definitely recommend doing that. I mean, even if you are going to SAE and then like get an internship on the side or something, just be around it and immerse yourself in it as much as possible. And that's like how you learn, just by being around it and doing it and seeing other people do it, you know? So let's see if there's any other quick questions here.
Hey Dylan, while you're doing that, sorry man, I know you're trying to answer some questions. Are you able to grab that Dropbox link again and just throw it in the chat for us? We've just got an issue with it erroring out. We might try and get that one sent out in the email with the sessions as well, guys. So don't stress out too much if it's not opening.
Yeah, let me see if I can grab it here.
Thanks, mate. Well, Dylan's doing that, just on the topic of, you know, going to get internships with all of these places, like I know a lot of you will have to do that as part of your degree and you'll be dealing with me, but what all of these places say over and over again is that they're looking for people who know their stuff, that have been working really hard all the way through. And, you know, they harp on about transferable skills over and over, but it's about how you go about dealing with people as well as the actual technical skills. You can be the smartest engineer in the world, but you know, if you're not great to deal with, then they're not going to want to borrow you. So get out there and build that rapport and just practice dealing with artists. You're going to deal with fun artists. You're going to deal with really, you know, hard to work with artists. But that's kind of all part of the parcel, and it really does show, you know, even within a span of 1 or 2 years of studying. So it's something, even people that are great to deal with all the time, still have to keep working on.
Definitely.
That,
or the goth pop. I like it.
That link's playing up, Dylan. We might email that one out after the session.
Okay.
It could just be a Dropbox error.
Okay, yeah, maybe it's an error on my part with that. I'll look at that. So speaking of community in these gigless times, what type of environments can producers put themselves in to connect with other creatives organically? It's a good question. I mean, maybe I'm the exception, but I mean, I've been open through all this stuff. Like here at the studio, I mean, we're very diligent about like cleaning and like making sure stuff's wiped down between sessions and artists and clients and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think people are, at least now, by now anyway, people are a little bit, they're everyone's got their masks on and like a little less paranoid about leaving the house. And so, I mean, that's like a trick question, because I don't know what it's like in like where you are. And here in Los Angeles, it's like we're sort of in the middle of all of it, but people feel safe enough to kind of be out and about right now. But I mean, I would say just like virtually you could do like Reddit. Again, Reddit, I know I've found a lot of people that you can connect with via Reddit, or any other kind of like blog kind of things like that. Instagram, same thing. If you find somebody on Instagram that's doing something cool, like reach out to them and see if you guys can collaborate, or if there's something that you have a question like, oh man, I really like that track, what'd you do with that, or how'd you do that, or whatever. I mean, I think that's something that I would do, if I was like really kind of into what they were doing, So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Discord, Twitch, those are all kind of like good ways to interact and at least see what people are doing kind of more in real time, for sure. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys, we might round it up there. Dylan, thank you so much again, man. It's been a pleasure having you on, and yeah, really looking forward to doing it again.
Yeah, me too, definitely.
To everyone playing at home, thanks for tuning in, and yeah, we'll be sending out emails probably by next week sometime with links to all of the sessions and that Dropbox, and might just throw a few more links with Portia Street Studios stuff and some of Dylan's social stuff to get out there. But yeah, it's definitely getting late in LA, so Dylan, we'll let you go, man. But yeah, really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you real soon, okay?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it. And yes, hope to do it again. And thanks everybody for the cool questions, and push them to have me come back and do these more.
Yeah.
I'm having a blast doing these. It's a lot of fun. So, all
Awesome.
right. Cheers. You guys have a good day. I'm going to go to bed.
Thanks, Dylan. We'll see you soon, man.
All right. Take it easy. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.